Welcome once again to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises. It's the program in which we seek to understand the book of Revelation from a multi-generational perspective. I'm Jon Paulien, professor of religion at Loma Linda University, and with me is Nick Snell, who is one of the pastors at Azure Hills Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have Shifra Fepuleai, who is one of the pastors at Campus Hill, and Guillermo Borda, who is a student at Andrews University studying in a doctoral program in the book of Revelation. And we have a very special guest with us today. And I want to introduce to you Gaspar Colon. He was my college roommate, and we actually met in academy. I think it's probably safe to say over the air that he tried to steal my girlfriend. He lost, but he gained a friend. So it's not 100% accurate, is it, Gaspar? But anyway, we go back a ways. We go back a ways, and we met over a girl who's no longer with either of us. So that's okay. She was okay, but we were trying to figure things out. So anyway, Gaspar is special to this program because for the first couple of years, those of you that have been with us from the beginning will remember Sarah Colon. That's his daughter. And since Gaspar is on his way to join Sarah in retirement, his retirement, not hers. And so I thought it'd be nice to have him join us in this program and give a report on what Sarah's been up to since she left the program.
Well, she was at the Garden Grove Seventh-day Adventist Church for several years, and then transitioned to Hawaii, where she was working as chief operating officer of a speech pathology clinic, and subsequently has become the head chaplain at our Adventist hospital there in Hawaii. And so she is there happily doing the work of ministry that she's been called to in a healthcare environment.
Well, when you get there in a few days, please give her greetings from all of her fans at LLBN.
I will.
We miss her, but we wish her the best, and drew you to an excellent place when it comes to retirement. So, yes, well, it's good to have you back in the house, and it's good to have you on this program. So we are getting into Revelation chapter 13. And in our last program, we just introduced the beast coming up out of the sea. And I want to go back to that passage, and we can together look at a few more aspects of it. You probably remember that the big prophetic surprise last time was to discover that this beast from the sea, which is clearly negative, which is clearly on the side of the dragon, this beast from the sea ended up wearing the face of Jesus Christ. And that was a surprise, and we want to start from there and move forward to understand a little more what's going on in this passage. So Shifra, would you kindly read verses 1 to 7 of Revelation 13? And I'd like everybody who is listening to that to pay attention to the verb tenses in this passage. So Revelation 13 and 1 to 7.
All right. It reads as follows. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? And who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe, people, and language and nation.
All right, thank you. Before we get into those verb tenses, hang on to that thought if one of you is going to speak to that. I just want to note that last time we noticed that time and again in this very passage, there are allusions to the ministry of Jesus Christ, the 42 months, the who is like the beast, the death and the resurrection of the beast, the fact that the beast looks like the dragon, just as Jesus is the one that shows us what the Father is like. So we saw evidences in there that this is the face of Jesus Christ. And what do you guys make of that? Why would that happen? Why would this text portray the enemy of God and the enemy of his people in terms of the one that we all worship and adore? Doesn't make sense at first glance, but what do you think is going on here?
Well, imposters have to somehow look like those who they're imposturing. And so you might have a vestige of something like that happening because the devil wouldn't be able to impersonate if he didn't have some sort of semblance that would remind people of the truth.
All right. What about the rest of you?
Yeah, I would say that my mind went to the same place. It may not be, I don't know if I would use the word, it's a portrayal, but a description of, what the enemy is doing. So it's just descriptive. This is the mask that he put on, so that people would think that they're following God, but they're actually ending up following the enemy for his purposes.
One thing I would like to say that I find it to be interesting is that at the same time that there are some features and some characteristics that you find to be similar, or that strike some resemblance when you compare that to Jesus and Jesus' relationship to the Father and those different characteristics that you use that expression, like the face of Jesus on the beast, that kind of counterfeit, so to speak. One thing that is interesting to notice as well is that yet the beast is portrayed as these kind of terrible, beastly power, right? Which is very interesting because the word beast itself, while Jesus is represented as a lamb and there's a reference to him as a lion, the book never uses the word beast with reference to Jesus, right? So at the same time that there's some similarities, there's some key fundamental differences that I guess, one could speak of that idea of the imposter or the counterfeit, the lie, the deception. And at the same time, from the perspective of John speaking to the Christians in Asia Minor and the Christians throughout the centuries, is a way of saying, hey, this is no good. This is a bad thing, right? And it's that thing that Revelation does. It portrays these evil powers as, dare I say, nasty, fearful, or fear-evoking creatures. At the same time that it inspires courage in the Christians, but portraying clearly, hey, you should direct negative emotions. This is the argument that David de Silva would make in the book, Seeing Things John's Way, that the book of Revelation shapes the emotional reactions of the people. So they will direct negative emotions to these evil institutions and positive emotions to Jesus, which then plays a significant role. If you think about things like Linda Zagzebski's work on moral exemplarity, we know that the emotion of admiration is associated with the desire to imitate and be like, whereas disgust.
That sounds like worship, isn't it? Worship is admiration that results in a change of behavior.
Yes, definitely. And then on the converse, right? Disdain, disgust, or negative emotions lead people to steer away. They don't want to be that which they despise or that which they have negative emotions towards, right?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
I was go ahead, Chip.
No. Well, just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying, Scholar Borda.
Student.
Okay. Friend. It's like when I really think about how so much of the worst kinds of abuse, that becomes really intimate in those intimate spaces where betrayal of and violation of safety take place. It's when you trust someone, right? It's a family friend, it's someone that's you're related to, someone that's come around to the house or that you've been in relationship with. And so to have this feeling or this portrayal, like Nicholas, you were saying, I think it just, if we're going to talk about feelings, like your guard goes down, this looks like Christ, there's structures here that seem, you open up your heart a little bit, you allow them into intimate spaces. This is something that's powered by the dragon.
Well, I was just thinking about how this is a pattern that we've seen in different even nations over time. Even thinking about Hitler as he was building up the Nazi regime and everything, he made it look like he was the good guy and always painted somebody else as the bad guy. And so people were more and more and more favorable to him. And then he came up with different scapegoats and whatnot. And in the end, you see where that leads you, and it's a place that you never, ever want to be. And so that's something that I just was refreshed in that by a book called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. Short book, amazing book. You should totally check it out. But he talked about different places where that has happened, and it's like, wow. And he warns that we could even still fall into those kinds of things in our day and age, even in a democratic country like ours. So, because it's happened before.
That's why the books like Revelation were written, I think, because it's not just to satisfy our curiosity about the meaning of history or things that are yet to take place, but Revelation is giving us a paradigm of evil. And there's two characteristics of this beast: how it operates, how it governs. And one is force. It makes people do things. It threatens people. It demands. It hurts and it kills if you don't go along. So force is one of the methods of this beast, and then the other is deception. Force doesn't always work. Sometimes martyrs create more Christians, So when force doesn't work, tool number two is deception, lies. And that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, telling lies about God. Goes back to the book of Job, telling lies about God on the basis of how he's handling things in his universe. And I think the point that the book would want us to take away from that is that this is the opposite of God's government. That's the big question in the universe. Is God truly worthy to rule? That's the ultimate question. You see that in chapter 5, and worthy is the Lamb because he was slain. The death of Christ on the cross is the evidence of how God rules the universe. And it totally subverts the expectations that people have for a God. You know, the God is supposed to stride over the face of the earth and squash people like bugs. This God is different. And if this God has the ultimate power in the universe, we're in a much better place than we thought. But there are deceptions along the way, surprises along the way. And I think that's one thing this is telling us. Now, to complete the package, the dragon in chapter 12, verse 17, goes away to make war with the remnant. Where does he go? He goes to the beach. What is he doing there? He's finding allies. Well, the prophetic surprise might be that this is a counterfeit of the Trinity. You have dragon, beast, and false prophet. Is this Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? And I would point out at the end of this chapter, when the beast from the earth comes up, he brings fire down from heaven, fire from heaven. Holy Spirit did that. He doesn't speak of himself. He talks about the sea beast. Holy Spirit did that. He gives breath to the image of the beast. Pneuma, that's the word for spirit. So it seems to me that in the final crisis of Earth's history, Satan will attempt to portray that God is working in the world through force and through another truth that he presents. And revelation is given so that we won't get steered away from the real truth.
One thing I would like to say about that point that you bring about that the text is starting to sort of unveil a counterfeit Trinity, right? Which I think is a very important point. I think, you know, we may, I think there's implications we may explore from that point. One of them being that, you know, as much as sometimes we may think of certain institutions as secular, especially from a first century perspective, there's no such a thing as secular, neutral institutions from the perspective of the first century, you know, where John, there's not a thing really, right? Because the empire was also, in a sense, a religious institution because it had the cult for the emperor. You know, it had that civil religion with that idolatry around the emperor as well, right? So that's one of the things we may explore, we may think, I think, and reflect, which is even throughout history, right? What's the degree to which institutions which exercise authority are religious or purely secular governmental, or purely religious, or purely secular, or a combination? Where do we see, you know, different institutions going in that regard? That's one thing to, I guess, keep keep watch of. And the second thing I would say is very interesting with that idea of the book kind of presenting these negative sides of these powers that exercise authority and that may try to demand our allegiance, even using coercion. There's the book called Colossians Remixed by the authors Walsh and Kismet. And in that book, there's a phrase that they suggest, very interesting. They suggest the following: what every empire wants you to think is that what you see is what you get. What every empire wants you to think is that what you see is what you get. In reality, the book of Revelation says that's the lie, because in fact, there's a whole lot more going on than what you see. And precisely, Christians, their only hope is basically grounded on what you cannot see. Especially in the first century, they could look around with persecution, different things. It looks like Caesar got the upper hand. It looks like Jesus lost. But as we see in the book of Revelation, in the letter to the Hebrews, we see, no, Christ is the one that is victorious, and whoever is with him will win, even if it doesn't look like that's the end, right? So what you see is not necessarily what you get, right? So that the book of Revelation, in a sense, inspires and this has been, I guess, misused and abused throughout the centuries, but it inspires mistrust in figures with a lot of
Human
authority.
institutions. Yeah.
Yes, it inspires mistrust. And I think rightly so, because more often than not, humans abuse their authority.
Well, the classic American joke is, we're from Washington and we're here to help you. Everybody hears that, they laugh, because they realize that that when you're seated in a position of power, it's almost inevitable that your first thought goes to retaining your power. I mean, after all, to be a senator or a president or something like that, there's a tremendous amount of meaning and purpose in that. And when you lose that, when you lose connection with that, it's a tremendous loss personally. Unfortunately, the hostage is to the meaning and purpose of leading individuals in our lives is everybody else. And it may seem like, something positive, but I think when it comes to ancient Rome, though, you're right. To talk about religious and secular probably isn't correct, but civil and religious might be more helpful. There's definitely a civil government, a civil law, but it was also thought of in religious terms. And the religion probably was a way of motivating loyalty to the state. If the emperor is also your god or your prophet, or however you want to look at it, you're more likely to be loyal than if you just think that's some guy who got up just like I did this morning and I could take his place and no one would notice, so.
Yeah, John, there's a recurring need for us to remember that in chapters 4 and 5, John the Revelator was assured that there is a kingdom beyond the kingdom, that when the heavens open up and we look through, that there's a throne, that there's a kingdom that is above and beyond all other kingdoms. And regardless of what's happening on earth, regardless of what the counterfeits come with, that this kingdom beyond the kingdom is our source of hope. It's our source of a reality, not an alternate reality like the one that we see on this earth, but the true reality behind every kingdom in the world. We see this in the book of Daniel. We see this now portraying itself in all the attempts to counterfeit God and his plan of salvation. So keeping in mind the kingdom beyond the kingdom helps us to see the contrast between the real and that which is being portrayed as a counterfeit of the real.
So Revelation's kind of pulling back the curtain to a wider reality. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to get back to the original reading of the passage. What did you notice about the verb tenses there?
Past tense.
All past tense, every single one. Now, if you find a verb that's not in past tense, it's because it's a subordinate clause. But if you go to the main verbs, they are all in past tense, right from the end I saw to the end of verse 7. But then when you get to verse 8 immediately switches to future. And they will worship him. Everyone who lives on the earth will worship him. Future tense. So there's a shift between past and future. Now, the time frame of Revelation 13, I would argue, is chapter 12, verse 17. You have come through the whole era, the Jesus era, from his birth in Revelation 12:5 to the final battle in Revelation 12:17. So Revelation 12:17 sets the context for chapter 13. The dragon goes out to get allies. And then in chapter 14, the remnant is portrayed. So you have 13 and 14 unpacking chapter 12, verse 17. So I would understand these verb tenses as being related to the intro verse in 12:17, in relation to the end of time, what you're getting in the first 7 verses is in the past. Now, one thing I've noticed, take a look at verses 1 and 2, and I invite all of our viewers to do the same. Take a look at verses 1 and 2. What is going on there?
A beast is rising out of the sea, and it's being described.
Okay, so
And the
it's a
dragon gets
description,
power.
it's a physical description, right? It's a visual description of the beast. And then in verses 3 through 7, you have a whole bunch of stuff in past tense. It's the backstory of the beast. So you have a new character. You remember in chapter 12, we talked about new characters having a visual and then having a backstory. For this beast, the first 7 verses. Verses 1 and 2 are the visual. Verses 3 to 7 are the backstory. So the question is, what is happening here? He's introduced a new beast into the story and then hits a pause button, lets you see what it looks like, gives the backstory, and then moves into the time of the vision. So it's like a pause button, new character comes in, gets introduced, and then you move on to the vision itself. So does that make sense to you guys? What do we do with that? If this is past tense, what is it? What is going on here? If this is before the end, where do we locate it? That will be the question I think we can take up next time. But what we have here is an entity which looks, I mean, it's clearly beastly. It's clearly on the wrong side. But there's something Christian about it. There's something Jesus about it. Is it possible that something can represent Jesus on this earth and not be what it seems to be?
Yes.
This is one way for me to figure out when I'm talking too much. Okay, what do I say now? Yes. Well, anyway, yeah, we have about 30 seconds left, and so let me just summarize and say we are getting into chapter 13, and the beast from the sea is one of the allies that the dragon calls on to be helpful in the final crisis of Earth's history. And we will want to say more about who this ally is and what it means to us today. And we'll do that when we take it up next time. So for now, this has been GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises. Glad you could be with us. See you again next time.